everybody, and welcome to the Comics Alliance Top 5. I'm Chris Sims, and this week we're going to be talking about super teams. Whether it's the Avengers, the Justice League, or even the Guardians of the Galaxy, there are a lot of great superhero teams out there. But, as you might expect, there are also some that are not so great. So this week, we're talking about the top 5 worst super teams of all time. Starting us off at number 5, we have the Champions, a team of superheroes who literally had nothing better to do. Whenever the subject of weird teams comes up, the Champions are always one of the first teams to get mentioned, and for good reason. They don't make any sense. You've got 2 former X-Men, a Russian super spy, an Olympian god, and a demon from hell hanging out together, fighting crime in sunny Los Angeles, California. Now, here's the secret though. The Champions are actually awesome. I mean, no, they don't make any sense, but that's kind of their charm, especially when they're running around fighting Zobos, that's zombie hobos, or Swarm, a Nazi made of bees, the greatest villain in Marvel Comics history. They were very short-lived though. The Champions only lasted about 3 years before Hercules, Black Widow, Iceman, the Angel, and Ghost Rider found better things to do. But hey, they did fight Godzilla that one time. That's something not a lot of heroes can say. Coming in at number 4, it's the Blackhawks. No, not the team of independent air mercenaries who battled against Nazis in World War II. Well, it's the same guys, but in 1966, the Justice League informed them that their old-fashioned Nazi-fighting ways weren't enough to get by in these grim and gritty times. So the Blackhawks reinvented themselves as what are arguably the worst superheroes of all time. The team of international pilots reinvented itself, and while you had a couple of cool things like the armored Golden Centurion and the Weapons Master, you also had the Leaper, not to be confused with Batroc, and the Listener, a super surveillance specialist who wore pajamas covered in pictures of ears. I mentioned it was 1966, right? Before long, the super-heroic Blackhawks realized their new identities weren't working any better than their old ones, and so they decided to go back to the cool leather outfits and flew around in planes, having a lot more adventures. At number 3, we have one of the hottest teams of the 90s, ForceWorks. If you're not familiar with ForceWorks, it's sort of like the Avengers. If the Avengers were a dude that had a ponytail under a backwards baseball cap, jorts, and a razor scooter. Basically, if the Avengers were Atomax. There's not really anything wrong with ForceWorks, but they could not be more of their time. Even the Ultra 90s team of X-Force felt like they were doing something new and different. ForceWorks was just a weird team of third-string Avengers and new characters with names like Cybermancer. It's worth noting that the team was actually created by artist Tom Tenney and the writing team of Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, who would go on to reinvent the Guardians of the Galaxy, a team that had slightly more success in the long run. Speaking of teams reimagined for the 90s, clocking in at number 2 we have Extreme Justice. It ain't your mama's Justice League. 'Cause your mama probably has better taste than this. She seems nice. Extreme Justice was an attempt to capitalize on the, well, extreme trend of the 90s by getting some of that Liefeld style and applying it to characters from the fun, more comedic Justice League. So if you've ever wanted to see Booster Gold and Blue Beetle yelling at each other while spit flies out of their mouth, and Captain Atom with a grotesquely misshapen anatomy, this is the book for you. I've actually read every issue, and trust me, that is not an experience I would recommend anyone undertake. Nowadays, the book is mostly forgotten, except, of course, by people who like to make fun of old comics like me, but it's worth noting that in addition to including the Wonder Twins, you know, from Super Friends, this is also a book that brought you a story about Firestorm being an alcoholic that was presented with sensitivity and mature— oh, no, sorry, I got my notes mixed up. Firestorm throws up on Maxima during a fight, and everyone tells him to stop drinking. The end. Finally, slumming in at number 1, we have the New Guardians, the worst superhero team of all time. If you look back at this list, you may have noticed that there's a trend of books that are trying to capitalize on trends of their time and sort of falling flat on their faces while they do it. And nowhere is that more evident than in the New Guardians. It was an international team of heroes that spun out of the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths and Millennium, which is a discussion far too complicated to have right here. and obviously set out to be a modern take on superheroes. So modern, in fact, that it introduced villains like Snowflame, who got his powers from and worshipped cocaine, and Jet, a member of the team who was, quoting from Wikipedia, infected with HIV after being bitten by the Hemogoblin, a vampire with AIDS. 1988 was a rough year in comics, everybody, but it might not surprise you to learn that the New Guardians didn't live to see 1989. That about does it for the worst superhero teams of all time. If you've got a pick for your least favorite superhero team, why not let us know about it in the comments over at comicsalliance.com or hit me up on Twitter @TheISB. We'll be back next week with another top 5 list. We'll see you then.